I'm turning on the streaming so that in future you can come back and listen to this very same sutta study class on Dhammadharini's YouTube channel. Not to mention the people who can watch it on Facebook. So all of our thousands of Facebook friends have a chance to hear the sutta. So it's streaming. And the sound is set up, and we've got a few good friends together on this Memorial Day holiday weekend. Instead of going to the beach or going to the forest, we have come together. We're here at the Sala, here at the Dhammadharini's Monastery in Pengrove. The sutta that we are on is number 12 in the middle length discourses. It's called the Lion's Roar, the Greater Sutta on the Lion's Roar, or the Mahasiyanada Sutta. And my intention, since this is a long sutta, is merely to tell you about the highlights. But if you wanted to follow along, if you had a copy of the Wisdom Publications version, the part where we're going to start is on page 167 in that book. So the situation in this sutta, which we reviewed last week, there is a person named Sunakata, who had been a bhikkhu and had wanted the Buddha to explain the origin of things, and had wanted the Buddha to display miracles. And he became disappointed in not getting what he wanted. Then he disrobed, and he was going around telling people that the Buddha was not really great. So the format of this language is going after point after point after point, saying that if somebody would make this accusation, it would not be correct, and it would lead them to a bad destination to make such an incorrect criticism. And we had last time we studied 5 qualities of the Buddha. The first quality is Itipiso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vidya Charana Sampanno Sugato Lokavidu Anuttaro Purisa Dhamma Sarati Satta Deva Manusanang Buddho Bhagavati. Such indeed is the Blessed One. It's hard for me to pull it in English. Holy, noble, rightly self-awakened, accomplished in vision and accomplished in wisdom and conduct, well gone, knower of the worlds, teacher of persons ready to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, enlightened, awake. And that's the first quality, number 1. Number 2 in the list is having supernormal powers, being able to walk on water and go through mountains and so on like that, to having been one become many, and so on. And this was actually one of the people who's here, Richard, very helpfully recollected that even in modern times, we recognize out-of-body experiences. And that would be one way of explaining these supernormal powers. Then next is the divine ear, where the Buddha could hear things from afar, wherever he directed his hearing faculty. And then the power of mind reading, being able to know the minds of others, what the state of mind was. And then the fifth quality is the 10 powers of a Tathagata. And then the 10 powers are itemized. He knows the possible and the impossible. In other words, he knows causation. He understands karma, how beings are born according to the skillful or unskillful quality of their acts. He knows the ways to all destinations. He knows what kind of behavior is leading towards heaven, towards different realms of rebirth. He knows all the various elements in the world, which is referring to, according to the commentary, to the 18 elements, the eye and the visual object and the eye consciousness, and so on through the 6 senses, the 5 physical senses in the mind, which makes up the entire world that we're able to experience. Then the different inclinations of beings and the faculties of beings, which are somewhat similar in terms of who has the capacity for what kinds of accomplishments, which of course is in part determined by preceding causes and conditions. And then he knows the defilement and purity of concentration, meaning the factors that are supporting developing pure concentration, and then the opposite factors like the hindrances are the kilesas, which would be blocking the purity of the concentration, the recollection of his own past lives. The divine eye is given in terms of being able to see things that are far away, or see things that others cannot see, like seeing through wall and so forth like that. And then the last is the most important one of all, the last of the powers of the Tathagata. He knows the destruction of the taints, which is the epithet for awakening. So he has awakened, he knows awakening. And the taints are the 3 kinds of phenomenon which are almost the definition of what it would be to be reborn in samsara, especially for us humans and ghosts and the lower realms of the gods are all born in the kama realm. We're born in the realm of the senses. So we got the kinds of bodies and brains that are having our experiences through the senses, and we've got the equipment to keep on grasping after the objects that we encounter with the senses and so on. So that's almost like in the nature of being in samsara, isn't it? That we've got these tendencies. And then the second one, the bhavasava, the tendency to become, is everything that's leading in the direction of being reborn in some kind of a realm. So if you live like an animal and think like an animal, you're heading to being reborn as an animal. So in effect, what you experience now is sort of like a microcosm of the realm of existence that you are headed for. That's becoming, and we're filled with craving and longing for these things. We long for the fulfillment of pleasant sense things, and we long for to be in a good world. And then the last is the taint of ignorance, which again is sort of a different way of looking at it than what we talked about last time. But a person if you think of those three taints as being qualities of samsara, sort of like the natural world, our natural inheritance before we woke up or gained wisdom. So the process of the natural world, in a way, is kind of mindless and blind. So like a natural selection, it does its thing. It's not because there's a little person inside who wants something and is choosing something. It's actually happening apart from any of our conscious awareness or any of our knowledge, but then it creates so many results. And so then if we are not wise and we just follow along the stream, we just float along as we're carried along by nature, then we'll be carried to be reborn. And the knowledge of the destruction of the taints, that is the quality of the Tathagata, means that he's done with that. He's done what had to be done. This is his last life. There will be no more rebirth for him. So that was what we discussed last time. And you could think, oh my goodness, the Buddha has explained in summary of all of his superhuman powers, and he's explained the things he's realized in a way which is a kind of a summary of the Dhamma. What else could there be? But actually, he's just getting started. So now comes a whole another hour of the greatness of the Buddha, his claim, his lion's roar about the things that he possesses and the things that he has realized. The next one is Bhikkhu Bodhi, translated as 4 intrepidities. He says, I realized one has 4 kinds. Mante Sujata translated as self-assurance. He has 4 kinds of self-assurance. With these, he claims the bull's place, roars his lion's roar in the assemblies, and turns the holy wheel. I got very interested in this word that's translated as intrepidity or self-assurance. It's called Vesak, perfect self-confidence. If you track that word back, it's related to another word called Visarada. And that goes back even further. Visarada also means like being confident or knowing how to conduct oneself, being skillful. Sarada has got the literal meaning of a crop. And it's referring to the green corn when it first is harvested in the late summer, which is so soft and tender and sweet. And for a human, it means somebody who's kind of fresh, sort of naive, someone who might be timid or very humble because they're so young and soft. And then the Visarada is how the corn is after it's gotten fully mature and it's started to turn, the starches come out and it becomes hard and it becomes something that you can save and put in the in the granary or the basement and keep it for a long time, and it becomes your staple food that you can subsist on throughout the winter. So we could think about that the Buddha, as we'll see in the few minutes down, every kind of hardship, he's been there and done that. Whatever trouble there could be, he went through it. Whatever wrong turn a person could make, he tried it. And so now he's completely fully developed. He's got this Vesaraja. And what are the four? So the first one is knowing about the ending of the asavas. Okay, and this, I just explained this a few minutes ago. If anybody says, you claim to have ended the defilements, but these defilements have not ended, that would be not legitimate. Even in modern times, people might, if you met the Buddha, you might not have the courage to say, you say that, but it's not true. But now, the Buddha has had his parinibbana a long time ago. And you could find skeptical modern people who say, well, the final goal of Buddhism is just a pie in the sky. It's not a real thing. It's not something that actually can be realized. And this is what the Buddha denounces. And he's saying, I know because I did it. And so this is in part like the importance to us of having a Sama Sambuddha who can make this not just on a theoretical basis, but he actually knows it because he done it. So that's the first one. And then the next one is the acts that you say are obstructions are not really obstructions for the one who performs them. This is a referring to something in the Alagadupama Sutta. Is that where it is? Ajita, a monk who had the idea that having sex would not be an obstruction. And so he used this exact expression. And what the Buddha says are obstructions are not obstructions. And the way he had gotten to that was he noticed that the monks eat food almost every day. And the food is a sensual pleasure. And yet the food doesn't present an obstruction to them. Even sometimes the monks would receive really nice food that, is pleasant. And yet that's still not, and the reasoning is false because the Buddha says in that sutta that in order to be involved in sex, one would, you can't do it without the desire. You can eat without desire, but you can't have sex without desire. So that's the reasoning for that. But the Buddha, he had his luxurious life. He tried it. He's been there. He's done that. He recognized it as an obstruction from his experience. Then the third confidence is that it would be wrong for anyone in the world, impossible for anyone in the world to legitimately scold the Buddha, saying the teaching doesn't lead those who practice it to the complete ending of suffering, the goal for which you taught it. And again, we can come to have confidence in these things based on our own experiences. The Buddha's invitation was to come and see for yourself, right? So one way is to follow these practices and see where they lead. But before we have come to the goal, our confidence is could be based on the confidence that we have in the Blessed One, knowing that he did experience the whole package. He did make the entire journey. So this kind of teaching about exhorting us to have confidence in the Buddha, to trust the Buddha, is based on that he has done the whole thing. In other places, what this reminds me of is we studied a little while ago about the idea that a doctrine about the self could lead one to the end of suffering. And what the Buddha said, he said, if this doctrine about the self could lead to the end of suffering, I would be teaching you a doctrine about the self. But it's not able to lead there. And so he doesn't teach that doctrine. The doctrine that he teaches is dukkha samudaya, dukkha nirodhagamini patipada. Abhisam patipada avidaseka asati. So suffering, the arising of suffering, but from a cause, the cessation of suffering when the cause ceases, and the path leading to the end of suffering. And those are the 4 kinds of self-assurances. I will pause here and ask if there are questions or comments about the 4 intrepidities. And maybe we have when we're doing our check-in here internally in the community, people can rate themselves according to 5 pictures of different kinds of sheep. 9. So it's 9 levels of, one of the sheep is like very down and the other one is up like that. So if you wanted to rate yourself on the green corn scale, do you feel like you are a tender, soft, timid bit of green corn, or do you feel like you got a bit toughened up and you haven't maybe been through everything, but you've been through a lot and you got some maturity, some strength? Yeah. So any questions about this so far? Ananaya.
Well, one is a comment that intrepidity, I looked that up real quick, and actually, obviously, it's intrepid, but the language, if using that reference as opposed to self-confident, this is so you've got resolute, fearlessness, fortitude, and endurance, which I just personally think is a stronger thing than self-assurance. But that aside, and I would say, well, I am old, and I have to say there are a few things that I think I have managed to become aware of and be let's see, how would I say this? More astute and certainly more discriminating at this point in my life, having gone through the briar patch and kind of at least halfway come out the other side.
Thank you. Damon?
Yes. So the earlier powers, which are those more supernatural powers, are one thing. But the most recent ones that you mentioned with regard to the self-confidences that he boldly proclaims, those seem much more doable, much more like without question, because, you know, he says any of us could attain those things as well. Doesn't he?
A human being can. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead because there's quite a lot to cover, and you'll have more opportunities in a few minutes to comment and question. So then he goes on about the realms of existence. I suppose someone said the ascetic Gautama has no superhuman distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones. And then the Buddha speaks about 8 assemblies. Now, in Buddhist cosmology, we know that Chaitanya is karma equals karma.
Here's some information.
I said cosmology, and they thought I didn't know the meaning, so that my computer started to tell me about it. In Buddhist cosmology, we know that Chaitanya is karma, that what we intend becomes the character of our actions, of our intentional actions. And then there's a very precise correlation between what is dominating the mind and then what type of realm that one is headed for in terms of rebirth. So, for example, someone dominated by greed could become a hungry ghost. Or you could say that there's a way that the cosmology is a reflection of the psychology that we experience right now. So a person who is really dominated by greed could feel like a hungry ghost. Even if they're very fat, they could feel like a hungry ghost. Even if they're wealthy and can get anything they want, they could feel like a hungry ghost because of greed having taken over their mind. And then there are many different examples of that, but another is there's a certain set of meditation practices that are called the formless meditations, and they lead to rebirth in formless realms. And then there's another set of meditations, the jhana meditations are referred to as fine material meditations, and they lead to rebirth in the fine material realm, namely in a heavenly realm, if the person has not realized their awakening and come to the end of rebirth. So that's just a general idea. And then so the Buddha, these realms are called assemblies, and the assembly is it's a group of people sitting around, just like this. So here we are, an assembly. What are the 8 assemblies? The assembly of aristocrats, Brahmins, householders, and ascetics. At the Buddha's lifetime, the caste system that we know today in South Asia was not developed into so many categories and subcategories as it is now. So there were basically these four classes. What's translated here as aristocrats. They are the military leaders. They also would be known like the children and grandchildren of a conquering military guy. Could be somebody who's not that tough, but they're very luxurious and extremely very privileged, enjoying a lot of pleasures of the senses, but also having roles in government. Then Brahmins are the religious. There's a debate whether the Brahmins are higher or lower than the Kshatriyas. Each one thinks that they're kind of better than the other one. The house practice of the Brahmins is kind of centered around the hearth. The worship of fire, maybe part of it. And the practices, like household practices, like bathing, become sort of like ritualized, that they become sacred. And there's a there's a lot to be admired in the Brahmin class. During the Buddhist time, there was a certain amount of economic disruption happening because of the process of history. And so you could have aristocrats who would blow all their wealth and become a slave, or a Brahmin who would have some bad luck, a bad harvest or something, and become poor. So it doesn't necessarily translate to great wealth because there was not that kind of security, but nevertheless, the assumption is that you would stay in the same assembly as your parents. Then the householders are ones who are doing all of the crafts and those who are making things, who are creating wealth. And then the ascetics, many different schools of ascetics who have withdrawn from the household life. And then we come to the different assemblies of the gods. I took time to look them up. We sort of read these things like at the Buddha's enlightenment, when the Buddha taught the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. All the different realms of the gods heard about it, and they were shouting and rejoicing. And then the next level would hear it, and then they would shout and rejoice. Isipatana, the Sublime One has told the sutta. So the realms, the four heavenly kings is one realm. These are four Buddhist gods, each of whom watches over one of the cardinal directions of the world. They live on the lower slope of Mount Sumeru, which is the lowest of the 6 worlds of the Devas. And this world is still part of the Kama Dhatu. So like the humans and the animals, we're still in the realm of sense desire. And then the next assembly of gods are the gods under the 33. This is called a Tavatimsa heaven. It is the second one, just above the 4 heavenly kings. It's the highest realm that's physically connected to the world. It's on the peak of Mount Sumeru, comparable to Mount Olympus. There were not 33 I can't find there's some kind of explanation why it's called gods of 33, but it's The 33 in the name of the heaven is not an enumeration of the gods who live there. There's far more than 33 of them. It's just a general term that came passed down from Vedic mythology, and it means a lot. Okay, so a lot of gods. Also, we know that Tavatimsa heaven appears in many stories. The Buddha visited the gods in Tavatimsa heaven. They came down and visited him, and they discussed religion. This is what I say whenever a Westerner sort of challenges me and they point a finger and they say, "Do you believe in God?" And I said, "Sure." My teacher, the Buddha, knows a lot of gods, and he met them and discussed religion with them. The Buddha's mother, Maya, was reborn in the Tusita heaven, which is the next one up, and she came down to the Tavatimsa heaven in order to receive the teaching about the Abhidhamma. Okay, so that's the next realm. Then there's the assembly of Maras. So Mara is sometimes called the evil one or the killer, the obstructor. Sometimes he has the name Namuchi. He sometimes represents death, but he definitely, in the Buddha story, he is obstruct and tries to prevent awakening. He tried to prevent the Buddha from teaching. He tries very often to prevent people from reaching their liberation or from doing their practices. And then the assembly, that would be like Buddha's army, which consists of sensual. Here's another sutta. It's in the Sutta Nipata. Sensual pleasures are your first army. The second is called discontent. Hunger and thirst are the third. The fourth is called craving. The fifth is dullness and drowsiness. The sixth is called cowardice. Doubt is your seventh. Your eighth, denigration and pride. Gain, praise, and honor, and wrongly obtained fame is the ninth. The 10th is when one extols oneself and looks down at others. This is your army, Namuchi, the squadron of the Dark One. A weakling does not conquer it, but having conquered it, one gains bliss. There's another story which I can't resist telling. It arises 300 years after the Buddha's death. And maybe I shouldn't tell it because my memory is too poor. You remember the name of that monk?
I don't know what story you mean.
He bound Mara.
I don't remember all of either.
The monk who bound Mara. The King Asoka was having a festival, and he was afraid that Mara was going to bring rain or some disaster to ruin the festival. And so he called this bhikkhu and tell him, could he please get Mara to the side so the festival could go ahead. And he did. He got Mara and tied him up by his hands, feet, and neck. And then Mara said, "You are the cruelest, meanest arahant I have ever met. I was defeated by the Buddha hundreds and hundreds of times, and the Buddha was never so rude nor so cruel as you are. When I compare you to the Buddha, I see how wonderful the Buddha was. I take refuge in the Buddha." and that's how Mara came to take refuge in the Buddha. And then I'm going to have to send a note later when I'll give you a reference to the story. The bhikkhu began to feel so sad because he had never seen the Buddha in person. This was 300 years later. And he said, "Oh, Mara, I wish I could see the Buddha. Would you be willing to take on the shape, the form of the Buddha so that I could know what the Buddha actually looked like?" And Mara said, "Well, I can, but don't bow down and worship me, because if you do, I'll definitely go to hell." So he promised not to worship. And so then he let the Buddha go, let Mara go, and Mara reformed himself into image of the Buddha, and immediately the monk falls down and bows. And he says, no, and then he said, "I'm not worshiping you. I'm worshiping an image of the Buddha." And this is the explanation for why 300 years after the death of the Buddha, they began to use statues of the Buddha as the object of veneration. So, yes, Upagupta. There's a famous grammar book. It says Mara was bound by Upagupta. Okay, so anyways, I'm going to come back to this sutta. There are these 8 kinds of assemblies. And then, the last assembly is the Brahmas. And the Brahmas are the most powerful of all the gods. The heavenly king of the Brahma world, he occupies in the fine material world, the heavenly world, corresponding to the first jhana. And in particular, the Brahma Viharas, that meditation practice would lead you to be in a heavenly world together with that God Brahma. So the Buddha visited these 8 assemblies. I used to sit with them, converse, and engage in discussion. So therefore, I feel secure. I can't be challenged about that. Then he goes, it's a bit of a sidetrack, I think. It's about the knowledge, the superhuman knowledge. He knows the different kinds of reproduction, born from an egg, from a womb, from moisture, or spontaneously. So from an egg, that would be like a chicken. From a womb would be like an animal. From moisture would be like if there's a rotten fish or a rotten carcass or a rotten dough or a cesspool, the creatures that arise there. And then the spontaneous reproduction is referring to gods and the beings in hell and certain beings in the other realms. He knows this, he sees it. So he's got those knowledges. He knows about 5 destinations. What 5? Hell, the animal realm, the ghost realm, humanity, and the gods. He said, I understand hell and the path and practice that leads to hell. I understand how someone practicing that way, when their body breaks up after death, is reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, an underworld or hell. And the same for each one of the realms. And he gives, he sees the path and practice leading there. So in the past, he comprehended the mind of a certain person. And he understood that person is practicing in such a way, has entered such a path that they're going to hell. And then later, after the person has passed away, they see, and it confirms what he thought, that being was reborn in hell. So because of this, it's like his scientific experimentation. He sees which way they're going, and then later he sees, did they go the direction that they were headed for? Then for each realm, he gives a vivid set of kind of a metaphor for what each realm is like. So for hell, he says, suppose there was a pit of glowing coals deeper than a man's height, full of glowing coals that neither flamed nor smoked. I guess if you're smelting iron or something like that, it's like when the fire is at the peak of intensity of heat. That's what he's referring to. And then along comes a person struggling in the oppressive heat, weary, thirsty, and parched, and they have set out on a path that meets with that same pit of coals. A person with good eyesight sees them and says, that person is going in a way that they're going to arrive at the pit of coals. And later, that's what happens. And then for the animal realm, the metaphor is, suppose there's a sewer deeper than a man's height, full to the brim with feces. And then along comes a person struggling with oppressive heat, weary, thirsty, parched, and he sees which way they're going. He says, you're going to go to the sewer. And that's what happens. And then the third person is the ghost realm. Headed for the ghost realm, he says, suppose there is a tree growing on rugged ground with thin foliage, casting a dappled shade. And along comes this person struggling in the oppressive heat, weary, thirsty, parched. They set out on a path that they're going to find that inadequate tree. And then the next metaphor is for the human realm, where humans can experience pleasant things. Suppose there was a tree growing on smooth ground with abundant foliage, casting dense shade. And along comes a person struggling in the heat. And he says, well, that person is headed for the human realm. Then the next one is the heavenly realm. Suppose there is a palace, or Bhikkhu Bhante Sujata translated as a stilt longhouse, because in the olden days, that's what they had for palaces. A stilt longhouse with a peaked roof plastered inside and out, draft-free, with latches fastened and windows shuttered. And it had a couch spread with woolen covers, shag-piled pure white or embroidered with flowers, and spread with fine deer hide, with a canopy above and red pillows at both ends. And here comes this person struggling in the oppressive heat. And he sees them and says, oh, that person is heading for heaven, for the stilt longhouse. And then the last metaphor is the person who has entered such a path that they will realize the undefiled freedom of heart and freedom by wisdom in this very life, and live, having realized it, with their own insight due to the ending of defilements. It's a beautiful contrast with the image of the palace. The image here is, suppose there was a lotus pond with clear, sweet, cool water, clean, with smooth banks, delightful, and nearby was a dark forest grove. And then the person with good eyesight says, this person is going that way. And then sometime later, they would see that person after they had plunged into that lotus pond, bathed and drunk, when all their stress, weariness, and heat exhaustion had faded away. They emerged and sat or lay down in that woodland thicket, where they experienced exclusively pleasant feelings. These are the 5 destinations. the Buddha is not finished impressing you. But I'm going to take a pause here and see if there's any comments or questions on this part of the sutta. When we are at the Aranyabodhi Hermitage in the wintertime, especially when there's a lot of intense rain, the water, flows and flows and flows, and it's maybe it's kind of tumultuous. When it's a heavy storm, maybe some sand comes along, but then later on, when it settles, you do get this impression that there's something that's so cleanly, something that's so pure in the water when it's filtered through the earth, and then after the intensity of the storm passes, and it's just bubbling up from the earth and creating just such purity and such cleanliness, and then it creates its own fog, and so then almost like every day there's a bit of like a drizzle and a bit of fog, and then all of the foliage becomes very clean and bright and refreshed, and the dust is all gone. So this is kind of one reason why being out in nature could lead the mind towards being prepared to abandon the taints for that undefiled purity, whereas living a life of luxury in a palace perhaps doesn't necessarily prepare the mind in the same way. Any comments in the room? Oh, Corina.
Thank you. I was just I was thinking about the earlier question, Damon's question, how the first couple, the 10 powers, seem difficult, much more difficult than the later ones described, like the divine ear, the divine eye. And I guess it's more of a comment. Just it seems like the opposite, actually, in the sense that don't they represent things that are possible to achieve through meditation and jhanas?
I think that's a good question. Somebody can correct me if I've got it wrong, but I believe that without becoming fully enlightened, a person could obtain some of these iddhis or superhuman powers. And I think possibly what Damon was pointing to is that the 4 intrepidities are very much right on the mark of what we should be striving for and what we are striving for. Mm-hmm. So they're much like sort of like close to the heart of the reason of the practice, mm-hmm. Whereas these other qualities are more like a sort of like decorations, impressive to have them, but not necessarily leading to the goal. But we remember that in this sutta that Sukataka, the monk, had who was questioning the Buddha, was mad because the Buddha was refusing to display the supernatural powers. Mm-hmm. And so the Buddha was saying, I do have those powers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the culmination of the practice is much harder. Yeah.
I think samsara is really hard too, in a certain way. I mean, hard in the sense of being full of suffering, mm-hmm. But hard in the sense of being rare. Mm-hmm. So the complete realization is rare. Okay. Would you mind speaking to the mic?
Based on my readings, Devdutt also, he was not enlightened, but he has some supernatural powers. So this is an example, like, I think through jhana also you can get some powers, but not to extent like, the powers a Lord Buddha can have.
Thank you.
So could I ask
Yes.
how to look at this list? Should I look at it just in terms of what's impressive, like to change Sunakata's view, or is there maybe a different rating, like to look at some powers as more important than others? How to hold all the different powers.
I believe it could be possible that the idis are the magical type powers. It's a kind of like a setup. So you think these things are great, but if you thought that was great, the powers that are related to enlightenment are really great. So there's a sutta called Marvelous and Wonderful, where the Venerable Ananda and some bhikkhus are talking about the marvelous and wonderful characteristics of the Buddha, and the fact that his mother didn't experience pain during the pregnancy and the birth, and the fact that when he came out of the womb he was clean, the fact that he was able to walk and talk immediately on emerging from the womb, and so forth. Those are like some of the miraculous qualities of the Buddha. But then the punchline of the story is that the miracle of realization and the miracle of teaching, that the Buddha is able to explain the Dhamma in such a way that another person can awaken. And so all of this other, it's like the folklore, is just put there as to kind of set up the story about what's really important.
Thank you, Aya.
I think I'm going to go ahead and continue. Now we're coming to the extremities that the Buddha went through on his path before he awakened. And some of these practices are not practices that it said that the Buddha undertook in this lifetime. So they must have been things that he practiced in previous lifetimes. Perhaps even a bodhisattva would not do those things, but perhaps before he was a bodhisattva, he did these other practices because they're pretty extreme. This is a strong passage. Sariputta, I recall having practiced a spiritual path consisting of 4 factors. I used to be a fervent mortifier, the ultimate fervent mortifier. I used to live rough, the ultimate rough liver. I used to live in disgust at sin, the ultimate one living in disgust at sin. I used to be secluded, the ultimate seclusion. So the first one, the mortification, that's the tapas, that's like lying on the bed of fire. I went naked, ignoring convention. I licked my hands and didn't come or stop when asked. I didn't consent to food brought to me or food prepared especially for me, or an invitation for a meal. I didn't receive anything from a pot or bowl, or from someone who keeps sheep, or who has a weapon or a shovel in their home, or where a couple is eating, or where there's a woman who is pregnant breastfeeding, or who has a man in her home, or where food for distribution is advertised, or where there's a dog waiting or flies buzzing. I accepted no fish or meat or liquor or wine. I drank no beer. I went to just one house for alms, taking just one mouthful, or 2 houses and 2 mouthfuls, up to 7 houses and 7 mouthfuls. I fed on 1 saucer a day, 2 saucers a day, up to 7 saucers a day. I ate once a day, once every second day, up to once a week, even once a fortnight. I lived committed to the practice of eating food at set intervals. I ate herbs, millet, wild rice, poor rice, water lettuce, rice bran, scum from boiling rice, sesame flour, grass, or cow dung. I survived on forest roots and fruits, or eating fallen fruit. I wore robes of sun hemp, mixed hemp, coarse wrapping cloth, rags, lode tree bark, antelope hide, whole orange strips, kusa grass, bark, wood chips, human hair, horse tail hair, or owl's wings. I tore out the hair and beard, committed to this practice. I constantly stood, refusing seats. I squatted, committed to the endeavor of squatting. I lay on a mat of thorns, making a mat of thorns my bed. I was committed to the practice of immersion in water 3 times a day, including evening. So I lived committed to this practice, these various ways of mortifying and torturing the body. These are possibly parallel to some of the practices that were done by the Jains at the time. There's a Jataka of the Bodhisattva undertaking ascetic practices in a former life as a naked ascetic, 91 eons ago. So those are the tapas, are the mortification. And then what's called living rough. Lukha means rough, poor, poor dress. The dust and dirt built up on my body over many years until it started flaking off, so he didn't bathe. It's like the trunk of a pale moon ebony tree, which builds up bark over many years until it starts flaking off. But it didn't occur to me, oh, this dust and dirt must be rubbed off by my hand or another's. It didn't occur to me. Such was my rough living. And then there comes to living in disgust at sin. We acknowledging what is disgusting is part of our mindfulness, and it's balance. There's a balance between what's attractive and what's disgusting. The food, when the people bring the food, it's very attractive, both because of the beautiful heart of the people who prepared it and are offering it, and also because of the food itself. It's so healthy and it's got the nice flavors and so on. And then after we've eaten the food and it comes out the other side, then it's disgusting, and we don't want to eat it anymore. Or even if we ate the food and had an upset stomach and threw it up, we wouldn't want to eat the vomit afterwards. So the practice is then not to acquire greed because of what's attractive, and not to acquire aversion because of what's disgusting, but to have equanimity, to be able to see what's good and what's disgusting, even when we see that which is sinful. Like if you see the raven stealing an egg from the nest of another bird. Is that what they do? No, they put their egg in the nest of the other bird, and then their little baby is bigger than all the other babies and gets all the food, and the other babies die. It's like, oh, that's disgusting. Or see human behavior that's disgusting. We shouldn't be overwhelmed with aversion about it. But so a person who wants to avoid evil can become obsessed in a way which is unbalanced. So this is living in disgust of sin. I'd step forward or back ever so mindfully. I was full of pity, even regarding a drop of water, thinking, may I not accidentally injure any little creatures that happen to be in the wrong place. Such was my living in disgust of sin. So in our Vinaya, if a living being is so small that we can't see it, it's not considered a Vinaya fault if without intending to do so, we destroy that life. And in fact, even when we are so pure and careful about not personally destroying life, indirectly, we're always using products. We use clothing. I mean, how many lives were destroyed in creating this cloth? How many lives were destroyed in creating, even if it's an organic broccoli, a lot of lives were lost. And so in samsara, we purify our intention. But we don't live in this thing of being freaked out by sin, de Guzman. But this is mostly comes up in terms of the reflection of the requisites, like what I said, that we reflect. We can't really get away from what's physically disgusting, because our own body is physically disgusting. Can't get away from it. Then the last of the four was the practice of seclusion. I would plunge deep into a wilderness region and stay there. When I was a cowherd or shepherd, or when I saw a cowherd or a shepherd or someone gathering grass or sticks, or a lumberjack, I'd flee from forest to forest, from thicket to thicket, from valley to valley, from uplands to uplands. Why was that? So that I wouldn't see them, nor they me. I fled like a wild deer, seeing a human being. Such was my practice of seclusion. And then there's even more practices. I would go on all fours into the cow pen after the cattle had left and eat the dung of the young suckling calves. As long as my own urine and excrement lasted, I would even eat that. Such was eating the most unnatural things. I would plunge deep into awe-inspiring forest grove and stay there. So awe-inspiring, normally it would make your hair stand on end if you weren't free of greed. And on days such as a cold spell, when the snow falls in the dead of winter, I stayed in the open by night and in the forest by day. But in the last month of summer, I'd stay in the open by day and in the forest by night. That's under the sun by day. And then these verses occurred to me. Scorched and frozen, alone in the awe-inspiring forest, naked, with no fire to sit beside, the sage still pursues his quest. He makes his bed on the charnel ground with the bones of the dead for a pillow. Then cowherds would come up to me. They'd spit and pee on me, throw mud on me, poke sticks in my ears, but I never had a bad thought of them. Such was my abiding in equanimity. So these are the hardships that the Buddha describes attempting in his attempt for purification, right? He goes on to more false paths, false attempts to find purification. Some ascetics have the doctrine that purity comes from food, meaning from not eating. They say, let's live on jujubes. Jujube, that's a small fruit. And I think you can leave it on the tree and it will dry up and wither, and then you can pick it when it's on the tree. So you can go to the tree and find these withered up jujubes and try to survive on that. So he survived on jujube concoctions, just eating just one jujube. You might think that at that time the jujubes must have been big, but they were not. They were small. Eating so very little, my body became extremely emaciated. Due to eating so little, my limbs became like the joints of an 80-year-old or a corpse. My bottom became like a camel's hoof. My vertebrae stuck out like beads on a string. My ribs were as gaunt as the broken down rafters of an old barn. Due to eating so little, the gleam of my eyes sank deep in their sockets, like the gleam of water sunk down a well. Due to eating so little, my scalp shrivered and withered like green bitter gourd in the wind and sun. Due to eating so little, the skin of my belly stuck to my backbone. So when I tried to rub the skin of my belly, I grabbed my backbone. When I tried to rub my backbone, I rubbed the skin of my belly. Due to eating so little, when I tried to urinate or defecate, I fell face down right there. Due to eating so little, when I tried to relieve my body by rubbing my limbs with my hands, the hair, rotted at its roots, fell out. And this whole prose poem is repeated with respect to mung beans, sesame seeds, or rice. So he repeats it 4 times. He says, I did not achieve any superhuman distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones because of that practice and that grueling work. I didn't achieve that noble wisdom that's noble and emancipating, which leads one to the complete ending of suffering. So the practices do not lead to the end of suffering. Wisdom leads to the end of suffering. That's one of the fetters that we need to give up before we get to stream entry, is the fetter of clinging to rites and rituals. And this is what he's referring to. I see a question. Okay. There's several beliefs that are about different ideas about the self and rebirth. Purity comes from transmigration, from rebirth. And the Buddha, again, this is his lion's roar. He's been through so many eons, he could remember the eons of the uncountable previous lifetimes. And he doesn't need a theory to get to this conclusion, because he knows directly from his own experience that there's nothing in the cycle of rebirth that naturally leads to purification or leads to the end of rebirth. It's only the wisdom, the destruction of the taints.
Coming to the end of our time.
Oh dear. Can you give me 5 more minutes? Okay, I'm going to go ahead. They thought purity comes from sacrifice. Purity comes from the sacred flame. And the Buddha said, no, he checked it out. It doesn't. And then they thought that the Buddha was, when he's elderly, he's going to not be endowed with perfect lucidity and wisdom. But he said, I am old and I do have perfect lucidity and wisdom. It's extraordinary. If I had 4 disciples with a lifespan of 100 years, and each of the 4 was perfect in memory, range, retention, and wisdom, imagine how easy Easily, a well-trained expert archer with a strong bow could shoot a light arrow across the shadow of a palm tree. That's how extraordinary they are in memory, range, retention, and perfect lucidity of wisdom. They would bring questions about the 4 foundations of mindfulness again and again, and I would answer each question. They'd remember the answers and not ask the same question twice. They'd pause only to eat and drink, go to the toilet, sleep to dispel weariness. But the realized one would not run out of Dhamma teachings, words and phrases of teachings, or spontaneous answer. Even at the end of 100 years of answering questions, the disciples would pass away. Even if you have to carry me around on a stretcher, there will never be any deterioration in the realized one's lucidity and wisdom. And now, at this point, one of the bystanding monks is called Venerable Nagasamala. He's fanning the Buddha. He says, "It's incredible, sir. It's amazing." While I was listening to this exposition of the teaching, my hair stood up. What is the name of this exposition of the teaching? And the Buddha answered, you may remember this exposition of the teaching as the hair-raising discourse. That's what the Buddha said. So we had a little time for discussion. If you're out of time, you may go. But since I ran over my time, I'm willing to stay a few minutes longer if there's any comment or a question about this teaching, or if anybody thinks they need to try for themselves and do all that self-mortification process to find out because they think it might lead to purification.
All right. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to follow up sort of on something along the lines of those questions, not necessarily specifically to self-mortification, but, if the Buddha did all of these things, he said they didn't lead directly to his awakening, but to what extent did he need to do them before he awakened? And to what extent do we need to be seeking in this way as part of the process of awakening? Because I think people can get into this sort of seeking mode. And many of those who we respect, who we believe have woken up, have searched a long time before they got there. And to what extent do you think that that is a necessary part of the path? And to what extent can we just take what they've learned and take it on for ourselves without having to do all of that seeking for ourselves? Anything you'd like to say on that? Because it's a question that comes up.
It's okay. So, very early in my spiritual path, I suffered a lot, and then I blamed myself for my own suffering. And I'm pretty sure this is compatible with what the Buddha taught. It's not necessary to go looking for suffering or to go looking for pain. The suffering and pain will come to you. And when it comes, then you can take care of it by fully understanding it, how it arises, what the factors are, and how it ceases. But I'm quite sure that a practice which inflicts harm and a practice which is useless is not a practice that we need to do on our way along this journey. That's That's my answer, and I'm sticking to it. It could be that when you think about the arising of the Sama Sambuddha one time in an era, after a long period of darkness in which the world has forgotten the path, that at that time, when the world doesn't know what the right path is, then it might be that the Bodhisattva had to try a lot of wrong paths before finding the one that was the right path. But we are living during the Buddha Sasana, so we've got a lot of pointers and indications about what the right path is. And so we should stay on that path and not follow a wrong path. Okay, Richard.
Thank you. Yes, I've always found this extremely important here. But the Buddha tells Sariputta that by such practice, by such performance of austerity, I did not attain any superhuman states, any distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones. So he's saying quite clearly, and this is actually in quite a number of suttas, he brings this point up, that he didn't get anything, of any real value whatsoever from doing these austerities. And so one might ask, well, what is that vision and knowledge worthy of the noble ones? And the Buddha says quite clearly that, oops, I clicked on the wrong thing, that that knowledge is, when this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that comes not to be. Or that does not come to be. And with the cessation of this, that ceases. And that's why shortly before his enlightenment, when he was still a bodhisattva, he discovered the 12-fold chain of causation. And he describes in a number of sutras that understanding paticca samuppada is what allows one to become a sotapan. That's actually the entryway into becoming a sotapan, and then your knowledge and everything begins to increase and expand out from there. So anyway, I just really love the way he says this, that he did not gain anything, of any real value whatsoever from these practices, because many people have a tendency to think that even monastics, that if I do certain austerities and stuff like that, that's going to assist me, when in reality, one needs to just follow, the basic rules and regulations and study the Dharma and do the meditational practices. And those things will actually lead one directly on the path. And I think that's why the Buddha said that, any system where that eightfold path does not exist, cannot lead to nibbana. Anyways, that's the only point I want to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Damon.
Thank you. So is it at least one thing is clear, that in the beginning, the rebel says that all you merely purport to achieve is the end of suffering, which was so humorous. And then at the end is one of the, why his hair is standing up on end is because he's now in such amazement of that very feat.
It was a different bhikkhu who happened to be a bystander that was fanning the Buddha, who made the comment about the hair raising.
Okay.
So Sanakata was not convinced. So, but in fact, it was all reported to him secondhand. So he's given up, and I don't recollect what happened to him. Do you know? Okay, so, but it was a different monk. We have to be very careful with people who are so skeptical and negative about the wisdom traditions. Sometimes I've encountered a Dhamma teacher who says, well, if they're thinking like that, it's just hopeless. You can't worry about it. There's nothing you can do for them. But I believe that if a person is in danger of rebirth in the hell realm, that it would be very good work for a monk to at least try to get them shifted onto a path that's not aiming for hell. And I basically, that if they get an understanding of causation in terms of karma, even if they're skeptical about rebirth, if they understand in this life there is karma, and if they get a hold of how morality and happiness is tied together, and if they get a hold of practice of loving kindness, that it's definitely worth doing. And even an animal can understand kindness. So if somebody has a pet and they're very, conscientious, good pet owner, and they're kind to their pet, and they take care of the pet, and they give them the right kind of food and the right kind of medicine and everything, and that pet has got a safe life, that being who doesn't have very much ability to understand, they know what kindness is, and just that experience could be the ground for them to have a better rebirth. So I don't think the Buddha is saying that, someone who is so skeptical, or someone even who is slandering the Buddha or slandering the Dhamma, that we should give up on a person like that. Okay, Maitri.
Yeah, can you say a little about the gods of the pure abodes? The Buddha says here that had I passed through the round as a god in the pure abode, I would never have returned to this world. It appears a few
yes.
times.
So in the stages of enlightenment, there's the four kinds of persons: the stream enterer, the once returner, the non-returner, and the fully enlightened arahant. The person who's called a non-returner is a person who is not going to be born again in the human realm. They are going to be reborn one more time in the pure abode, and then from that realm, they will come to their final awakening. And so it was because of that, that the Buddha set aside that realm. He said that he's actually been through and been born in all the realms. But if he had been reborn in that realm, that would have been his last birth. And that's the reason why why that was specified. Now, whether that's part of the original story or whether as the tradition was passed down, somebody was like saying, well, wait a minute, he couldn't have been reborn into that realm because then he wouldn't be here again as the Buddha. So in any case, that's the reason why that's given. Richard?
Thank you. Not to disagree, but I think there may be another explanation for that. The formless realms go across the boundaries of the expansion and contraction of the universe. So had Buddha gone up into that realm, the lifespan is so long that this world, this one that we're in now, that the disciples, everyone, the humans at that time were inhabiting, he wouldn't have come back soon enough. You know what I mean? It's not that he never come down out of those abodes, because there are suttas where they talk about people coming out of those abodes, but the lifespan is so long that he just wouldn't have been here to become a Buddha in this life, in this world. But anyway, that's just an idea I have, a way of looking at it. That's what came to me when I read the sutta.
I think the explanation I gave is what the commentators said about it. It's true that in the pure abodes, there are some beings who are non-returners, and there are other beings who are not non-returners. And I read somewhere in the sutta that the ones who are not non-returners are not even able to see the ones who are non-returners. For what it's worth. Yeah, so that's the reason for that. So the Buddha is the greatest, and next Saturday we're going to celebrate his birthday, his day of his full enlightenment, and the day of his final extinguishment. The Sunday programs will go on as usual at Zoom, and if you're in the Bay Area, I warmly invite you to register and come to participate in the in-person events. Now, I'm just going to mention further that if anybody wants to talk to me, I'm trying to be here on Saturday afternoon and Tuesday afternoon to talk to anybody who wants to talk to me individually or in any way. And I know that one of us has asked for an interview, a practice interview, and yes, I'm willing to do that. And so Damon, I'll see you on Tuesday. And so we're trying to I'm trying to have my priorities to be present to speak about the Dhamma with you or anybody who wants to speak about the Dhamma. And that would be more important than keeping up to date with the filing of the paperwork or something else that I could do otherwise. So thank you very much. And let's close with giving respect to the Triple Gem. Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavanta Abhivadi Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhamma Namasami Subhatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namah.
Thank you, Aya.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Right.